Hi.
Welcome.
All right, so I was told there's a Q&A, and then when I was on my way up here, I just started riffing on some notes and other things. And I just had some thoughts that I thought, it's a Friday afternoon. We should have a discussion about stuff. I've just been thinking a lot because of the cultural change that we've got to go through. I've been thinking a lot about justice in the workplace or a just workplace. I'm not sure. So first is I've just got a few thoughts. They're not well formed. They're just literally thoughts that I had in an SUV up here this afternoon. Okay, so I want to turn it more into a dialogue because we can turn it into questions and answers at the end of this. Because this was just, I guess, supposed to be a Q&A. So, anyways, who's seen this this statue in the news? What do you guys think of this statue? What? Awesome, right? I agree. When I saw it, I was inspired. And it's not just about the sort of optimism and strength, even with the vulnerability. It's also about all of those things in the face of that. Right? Now, what you want is you kind of want to have that all the time, no matter what. What you don't want is to have to be facing that all the time. Because we can't live, you can't live that way. If you're in the face of this all the time, it eventually just sort of wears you down. It just can be hard. And I think that's partially why the last few weeks have been so tough, is it was almost twofold. It was not just the constant sort of barrage of in the press about who we are and what we stand for, that I think for many folks feels different than their experience, but it's also the reminder that sometimes in the workplace, it feels like that, right? And that's something that's just unacceptable. Okay, so I have this idea that I came up with in the car. You gotta love it. Look at the space between these things. You're like, oh man, what's going on here? All right. Just workplace karma. The y-axis is justice. I don't know what kind of units we would measure this by. But the point is that let's say we're coming up with like an Uber version 2.0. I mean, what I've outlined at all hands meetings, I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about some next level stuff, not just for us. I mean, it starts with us, but I just think for all of tech, that's our opportunity. So Uber version 2.0 is literally the most just place to work in the world. There is less injustice and a lot more justice, and it feels really good. And I'll get to that, what that feel good is about. We'll get to that in a second. But imagine if we could create the most just workplace in the world, what would happen when all the great minds in all the other companies out there who see injustice every day, and especially the ones who see the most injustice, what do? They're going, well, I want to go from the unjust place to the just place. We would naturally be a magnet for the great minds at all the companies out there. And not just because Uber is the place where the cool tech happens, and Uber is the place that's changing the world, but also Uber is a place that feels like a wonderful place to work, right? So I started going, well, what the hell is a just workplace? Like, what does that mean? It's like easy to say, but we got to start putting some bullets down because this is Uber, and if you don't have bullets, like really, I'm just kidding, okay? All right, so I put some ideas about what it is, but I think this is the conversation that we've got to have at large as we think about cultural change. This is just, again, I keep qualifying, it's just some thoughts. These are not like hardwired or anything. It's just some thoughts, okay? So of course, all the great minds welcome. Like, we want to make sure not just the great minds of the people we know and the places we know, but the great minds at the places we don't know and the kinds of people we don't know. And in some ways investing more deeply than that, in that, the places we don't know, the people we don't know, than the things we already do know. Opportunity without prejudice, I think that makes a lot of sense. Everybody should have a really clear path, a transparent path for how to prosper and how to achieve their own professional goals, and how to seek new opportunities within Uber. And prejudice is just not a thing. I think that's kind of obvious, but it should be stated. Reward and acknowledge on merit. I know that the M word can be an interesting word in sort of D&I discussions. If you look up the definition in the dictionary, it seems okay, but I think the problem is that word has been misused. But at the end of the day, you want to reward and acknowledge people who are doing great work. I call it great inspired work. And great inspired work, one of the most demotivating things at a company is when somebody does great inspired work and is not acknowledged. When fundamental merit is not seen because of bias or prejudice, for example. And another thing that can be demotivating is when really somebody maybe who isn't doing great inspired work is being acknowledged. That can also be pretty demotivating. And that's also why we want to make sure that we get the perf thing. We need to continue to improve it because it's not perfect, and I think in many cases far from it. Of course, all ideas should be heard. Maybe that's one of the ones on the obvious side, and I'll get to a couple of these interesting ones here. Candor and feedback. When you give feedback to somebody about anything, when you give feedback, it's got to be candid. How many times you sit there and somebody gives it to you, but you're like, I can't really understand because you're not being candid. They're scared. They're scared about giving that feedback. And there's been a few examples that I've had recently where I had to really work, even with individuals who've worked at Uber for a long time who know me, were scared to give me feedback, right? Like in a recent example, I was talking to Anant. Many of you may know him. Tuan, he's on driver, right? He's a driver lead on engineering. And he had, I ran into him in the hallway at 1455, and he had something to tell me about where he was. I stopped by and I said, so how's it going? And we started talking, and then I said, so, the dev experience thing is something we want to get better at. I'm like, so how's the dev experience these days? And his face kind of like goes very somber. Okay. And I said, what's wrong? He's like, I can't tell you. I'm like, what do you mean? And he started getting like sweat here. But he was scared to tell the truth because he was afraid that somebody else might retaliate or something. Like, it was just a weird thing. And something I've known him for a while because he's been here for a while. But eventually I got there and he was able to give me candid feedback. And then we had an overall conversation with the leadership of engineering about how to improve dev experience. I think we're starting to see a lot of the impact of that conversation really coming to fruition. There's still a long way to go, but man, the dev experience is getting a lot better. And there's other situations I can talk about, and it's one of those things that sort of has led to the cultural change stuff that I've been thinking about. It should never be a situation where you're afraid to be candid. As long as you're optimistic, as long as you can deliver some feedback that's going to make that person better or Uber better, let's do it. And so we have to work on that. Just Workplace also is optimism in every interaction, right? So sometimes it's a hard message, but if you can find the optimism in it, then then your feedback is just. If it's negative or angry or fearful, all these negative words, this is where things start to go unjust, and we could sort of paint that picture if we have time at the end of this. And then there's the T word. We don't have a cultural value called teamwork. Some folks have pointed that out to me recently. I find teamwork in a lot of our cultural values, but we need to lean a lot more into that, because as we've gotten bigger, we're missing some of that. People don't realize that being an owner and not a renter is so much about teamwork. And actually, on Champion's Mindset, teamwork is a big deal. It's not just about getting yourself up, it's about helping others get up if they get knocked down. Everyone accountable to their actions, right? So if there's a good actor or a bad actor, somebody does something they're not supposed to do, they should be held accountable for that action. Somebody who does something great, we should be able to keep track of those great things that they do. I talked a little bit about the messenger, that candor has to come with the feedback, but what about on the receiver side? Curiosity is where somebody receiving feedback needs to come from. Not defensiveness, which is something I have to work on personally. We have to turn defensiveness into curiosity. It's like, well, tell me more. What is it you're seeing that I don't? And maybe even going a little further and saying, hey, is there something, maybe they're right, and sort of assuming they're right before just shutting something down. No tolerance for bias. This is an interesting one. Celebrate. I don't skip over this because it's not important. I think it's just something it's one of those ones that's like we've got to go big on. We have to do a lot more unconscious bias training and a lot of work there. Recently talked to Sheryl Sandberg about she actually wrote the unconscious bias training for Facebook. She wrote it herself. So I've been going over that with her. But celebrating overcoming adversity is a really interesting one. The overcoming adversity part is a big part of Champion's Mindset, and in a lot of ways, it's how Uber connects with diversity is through adversity. And what I mean by that is folks who are in a particular group that has historically been discriminated against have seen one of the most pernicious forms of adversity. And if you overcome that adversity, that makes you particularly Uber. Because we do the hard stuff. And we have to overcome things that are hard, and we have to get back up sometimes.
Travis?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt just a second?
Absolutely.
Can you also talk in a broader industry context? We have people here from other companies who would like to hear your thoughts at a broader level as well.
I had no idea this was outside of Uber. Oh my gosh. This is outside Uber? Is this being broadcast outside Uber?
It's not being broadcast outside Uber.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. Now I'm sweating. Woo! Raise your hand if you're from not Uber. Oh my God. Why didn't you stop me sooner? I can't believe this is happening to me. All right. Can you ask your question again, Kamal? Thank you.
Oh, come on. Everything you said is, I think, applicable to industry-wide. Like, we have been everywhere, right? There you go. You did an amazing job. You have done an amazing job.
Okay, so what was the question? I don't remember the question.
Let's use this each line item and make it applicable to a broader industry perspective.
All right. I am taking that advice. I mean, this applies everywhere. I'm giving out the keys to the kingdom here.
Seriously, can you raise your hands? Haven't you seen this everywhere in every company? There you go.
Yeah, no, I get it. Holy cow. All right. That has never happened to me before. There was one time I was on a conference call and I thought I was on mute and I said some weird stuff, but This is next level. All right. Okay, so the next one. All right, so embrace speaking up and speaking out. I think that is sort of self-explanatory. Um, that's going to be all of them coming up here. So I'm hanging in there. Just hold on. Okay, so what else? Okay. Oh, all right. So fiercely defend every individual's pursuit of happiness and prosperity. Um, I think Silicon Valley culture often can be about the stock options, can be about the RSUs, can be about how much I'm getting paid. But people don't just want money. They want to be excited about the work that they do. And that's the pursuit of happiness. It's a thing, I promise. Everybody's got it. And if you have an optimistic and just workplace, then that has to be a big part of what it is. Now, everybody has a different way to get there, and so you can't prescribe it per se, but you should respect it as long as the person's optimistic, right? There are limits to somebody's pursuit of happiness if they're like, well, I have to smoke a joint at lunch, and I need to have 2 camels behind my desk in order for me to be happy. You know, if it's illegal or it doesn't scale, like if everybody did it and it's a problem, then you can't allow it. All right. And then there's understanding intentions. I think this is just human stuff. A lot of people, you ever lose something, and then most people are going to say no, and then you're going to learn something about me, or at least what happened when I was a kid with my sisters and my brother. Will you ever lose something and then think immediately somebody took your stuff? So I was like, I'd always think, oh, my sister Angie took my stuff. And so what we just all as adults have to learn is that we have to start with optimism, which is assume your teammates are good until proven otherwise. And it's just a human thing, and a lot of people can just go there. And we just have to be careful about that. I think lots of us do this sometimes, and we just need to be careful if you want a just workplace. Because remember, imagine being on the receiving end of someone who starts with "you are a bad person." How does that feel? It's unjust to be thought of as a bad person without it being proven. Okay. What is not a just workplace? Well, these are straightforward, all self-explanatory as well. So I like to say negativity in all forms, right? Just be centered. Things are not always happy. They're not always wonderful. But when you bring that negativity to others, when you're uncentered, you're not finding your sort of zen, let's just say, you're going to make the world a worse place. You're going to bring some kind of injustice to your work environment. Bias in decision making. Super straightforward and so we don't want to make any decisions with a bias. You want the best idea to win, not the biased idea. All right, that sounds good. I like that. Okay. And this is related to the thing I said before, assuming bad intentions without proof. Of course, the basics of physical harm and property theft, but something that we've also that is important in companies is that information can be transparently distributed inside of a company, which can be very productive and very good for a culture. But if the information is distributed without permission outside of those walls, then you can get a situation where the now information has to be held tightly. And that can feel unjust in some ways. Transparency is one of the foundations of justice. I'm just checking to see what the hell I wrote. All right, so what are the types of things when a company considers cultural change, a company like Uber? All right, we have cultural values, and I'm the author of them, and I love them so much, and I think there's a lot of good in them. And sometimes, if they're not well understood, folks can do things they shouldn't do. We have one called Meritocracy and Toe Stepping, which toe stepping is about from the top down listening and putting your toes out there, and from the bottom up teaching that it's okay to step on those toes, and not in an angry or irritated, like in a negative way, but actually in a positive, optimistic, and candid way. And the reason why is because an engineer, this is years ago, but she was, it was late at night. That's when I usually have conversations because my meetings are over. And she had this great idea for a writer app, and I was so excited. And then I'm like, wait, why doesn't this exist? And she said, I didn't want to step on so-and-so's toes. And I said, let me get this straight. You sort of made Uber worse and stepped on yourself so that somebody else could feel good about their idea, which was not the best idea. And so if a meritocracy is a place where the best idea wins, you also have to encourage the toe stepping from the bottom up, and you have to empower that and embrace it. And it goes back to that little girl, the bronze statue. Strength, optimism with sort of like noble fierceness, if that makes sense. But if you're going to change your values, you say, well, what are the bad behaviors that are happening? What are the things we don't like? And doing a review of that. Uber's gone from 400 people to 13,000 in 3 years. That's crazy. But when that happens, you get a lot of first-time managers. You get, the culture can get highly variant because people are all new. And so you say, what are the bad behaviors? What are the good behaviors? And are our cultural values discouraging the bad stuff, encouraging the good stuff, and how do we change them to do more of both of those? Less of the bad stuff, more of the good stuff. You get the idea. Infusing optimism, I talked about this, optimism, curiosity, and candor. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. Just workplace framework. So I have sort of 3 pillars. One is what I call the great minds, which is go look where you don't normally look and invest deeply. 2, take unconscious bias out wherever it exists, and there's a lot of research about how to do that. And then there's justice on the inside, which is people need to feel free to speak up when they see something that's wrong. That should be the exception, not the rule, meaning it should be so just that it doesn't happen every day. But if somebody needs to speak up, they should feel great about doing it, and we should encourage it. But there has to be justice on the other side of that. Can't just be speaking up. And then there's the own it, share it, action it. I think folks who are at Uber have seen a lot of, like in our all hands meetings and whatnot, just sort of me own myself. What are the things that I've gotten wrong? Being too defensive, being attached to drivers making a good living on Uber, being attached to the idea that we should be proud of the work we do. And being attached to making cities better, and if somebody's confronting you with feelings or information that counters that, there's 2 ways to go. You can listen and be empathetic, or you can get defensive. And so what I mean by own it, share it, and action it is, first, a leader at any company should start by owning where have they messed up. Part 1, own it. And don't be afraid to do so. And then part 2 is share it. Well, I've done that with the company, now with a lot of other people. I'm so glad this isn't broadcast live. That would just destroy me. But then action it. What are my action items to make Uber better? But it gets even better, which is, if I can share, what can every single person, and I'm coming from the Uber context, what can every single person at Uber do to understand where we call them Bs, there's Ts and Bs, the top things that we do and the bottom things we do that we need to fix. Everybody's got Bs. So if we each own the things that we're doing that aren't quite right, that we can get better at, and you share that with your team and you action it, regardless if you're an individual contributor or leader. Imagine, and I think of this in Uber context, if 13,000 people are doing that all at once. That's like super good stuff happening at scale. And then you go, well, now that everybody knows this, and it's not like this is new. I'm sure this looks like a random self-help book here, but if an entire industry could do this at once, the kind of goodness that would come from it would be profound and would be inspiring. All right, so I talked a little bit about the meritocracy and toe stepping. Look, there's some folks inside of Uber who are like, wow, that's a rough name for a cultural value. And maybe we change the name, but the idea that the best idea wins, I think that should be a thing. And the idea that somebody, even at the lowest level, can speak up and do something that is the equivalent of optimistically toe stepping needs to be a thing. We need to be able to listen. So we can change the name, but these things, so I had this idea, about what I call a toe stepping clinic. And maybe we do this at an all hands sometime soon, is, I'll sit up there with somebody, it doesn't matter, some part of the company that is got something fierce to say to me about what I need to do better, and then I can show the whole company how you can receive it. They should be candid and optimistic, and I should be curious and optimistic, and then we can teach what that looks like when it's done the right way. And then we can call it whatever the heck we want. Somebody told me, we shouldn't call it meritocracy toe stepping, we should call it ice bucket honesty. And I'm like, all right, whatever. We can call it a lot of things. Okay. So anyways, there's some stuff. Okay. All right. So I have a bunch of slides I can't show after this. Whew, I'm glad I knew when I did. All right. Those are some random thoughts from an SUV on the way to Palo Alto. Thank you for listening.
We have questions.
Questions. Let's do it.
And first, let's pick up that. That was some honesty right there. I really love working for Uber and Travis and the leadership for this reason. It's very honest, very transparent, and that makes it so much unique.
It's so transparent that the world... No, I'm just going to stop. I'll stop. No, I don't know.
All right. So we have some questions that I'll ask from here, but at the same time, it's a very open forum. Please grab a mic, just raise your hand, and you can ask any questions, okay? So feel free, at any time, by the way. All right, let's do something different for a change. All right. Which historical figure inspires you the most?
Oh, that's a good one. So probably for the last 5 or 6 years, and this is before the play came out, okay? Before the play came out, my Twitter avatar was Alexander Hamilton, like years before the play came. Just putting it out there. When I read books, I read in genre. So I'll read lots of books in a single genre. So like I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I started reading Founding Father. Biographies, historical biographies. So all the Founding Fathers of the U.S., and they were like entrepreneurs, except they're starting a country. And Alexander Hamilton was super amazing. I think you have, look, I talk a lot about justice. I'm just about it. I'm also about civil disobedience, right? So some of the other biographies that I've read and enjoyed, like reading about the Civil War, reading about figures like Harriet Tubman and what they sacrificed to do something that was very risky, but the right thing, is super interesting. Gandhi, Martin Luther King, these are folks who defined what civil disobedience is. And there's just a lot of very interesting, principled thinking and principled action with a huge amount of risk, which is life and liberty, right? They could be killed, they could go to prison, but they believed in what they did. And so there's just a lot to learn from that. And that just gives you several folks that are just super interesting to me. And you also get this in the suffrage movement and some other things. So there's a lot of interesting figures, and I recommend. I'm a big sort of historical biography guy, so getting into those types of figures, it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting for us. I'm sure many female engineers and managers can relate, but we face adversity. You have faced a lot of adversity. Uber has faced it. So how do you keep on getting up each time you're knocked down?
Well, the last few weeks have been tough. I stopped going on the internet. I highly recommend that. None of you should go on the internet. Yeah, I mean, you know, there are a lot of characteristics that you can bring from being a scrappy entrepreneur that are good, and there's a bunch that you need to learn to work out of. But one of the things you learn when you're an entrepreneur for a long, long time and you fail enough times is you learn about resilience. And you learn that actually the definition of adversity is very relative, and you can move what it is. And what I mean by that is, okay, so my last company, first 4 years, didn't pay a salary, was broke, didn't always know where I was going to get enough money to eat next week, you know, that kind of thing. But I had a family, and my mom, open arms, right? So that's not real adversity. I mean, that's adversity of some kind, and sometimes adversity is in your head. It's almost adversity could be just the trouble you put yourself through on a particular problem. But you know, I could go back home, and my mom would cook me pancakes in the morning, or just give me a hug, and everything would be okay. So adversity is there are extreme circumstances that are clearly adversity, and then everything else, 99% of the world that you experience that feels adverse is in your head. But that's okay, because it's really a challenge that you want to overcome. And so loving the truth is a start, because if you love the truth, then you're not afraid of it, and then you move forward. But it still can be hard. Yeah.
Hi, TK.
Hey.
Can you talk about a good negotiation that you've been on, regardless of which side of the table you were on?
Yes.
And what was your key takeaway from that?
So most of my life outside of Uber, I have been on the weak side of the negotiation. So I am the best in the world at negotiating from a weak position, which, by the way, is very helpful then when things are starting to go well. You know, there was a negotiation. So there was this in 2001. My company had run out of money. We were broke, and I had 6 employees, and we were working for 3 months, the whole team, for 3 months without salary. And these were folks who were used to making $80,000 a year, $100,000 a year. In 2001, that was a lot of money, I promise. And for 3 months, they were working without pay. And I really needed some money. And I owed $200,000, and I was negotiating for a $300,000 seed investment. And the negotiation was basically for, I can't remember, it was like, I think it was like for 10% of the company or something like this. And little by little, they started to realize that I owed 200 grand, that like I had a bunch of engineers that hadn't been paid. And, you know, when you go through the diligence process in a seed round, you know, you're trying to put on a smiley face, like, we're awesome, we're killing it. And they're like, wait a second. And so I got a call from the investor. I'm like, hey, what's going on? This was actually a Friday after Thanksgiving. And this was 2001. And the investor was like, remember how we said we're gonna get give you $300,000 for 10%? We want to give you $300,000 for 30%. Which means you just went from like a $2.7 million valuation to a $700,000 valuation. It actually divided our valuation by 4. And I'm like, sounds good. Sounds amazing. Let's do this. And we signed, and I got my $300,000. And then I paid my $200,000 out, and I had $100,000 left, and I told all the engineers, now we get to work for half pay.
All right.
Question. Can you walk us through like your typical day? So I'm more curious, like, A, do you sleep? And B, I'm assuming you don't like wake up every morning and read the New York Times. But just like, what do you do? Like, what do you, tell me everything, the day.
Well, I brush my teeth.
Not everything.
Okay, thank you for the reminder, Kamal. All right, so everybody has a management style, and they do things differently, and there's no style that's right for everybody. It's very in tune to just what kind of just how your brain works, your personality too. So it was funny you said walk me through. Now those folks who are at Uber know I walk a lot. So the way I look at what I do, I call it problem solver in chief, which is I have a list of problems and I have a list of things that need to be invented or things we want to try or do. And I just start from the top and work my way down. And it changes, especially in a business like ours. You can get a new problem that goes to the top of the stack. And things can change and then change the priority of the things on that stack. So that's kind of how I do it. And so every day is different. There's no typical day. But if you went meta on it, it's I solve problems every day. And in that way, kind of lucky for me, it feels the same today as it did when we were small. It's like when we were 6 people around a table, because guess what? I wake up in the morning, brush my teeth, and then I've got a list of problems to solve and a list of really cool things to make. And a lot of folks think about problems like, man, you're all about problems? You got a problem? What's your problem? And maybe the model I like to think of, I got a couple sort of analogies that are helpful for this. One might be, think of a math professor, a great math professor, who doesn't have any math problems to solve. That's a very sad math professor. Like, she likes some math problems, and so do I, right? Or think of another thing. This is, I hope this doesn't get quoted anywhere, but I'm going to do it. Imagine if you are a emergency room surgeon. You're helping people, right? It's a tough day. And if you know anybody who's been an emergency room surgeon, you know everything's a problem. But what you do at the end is you heal people. It's noble. So that's how I think about it. And it makes my day fun, and you never know what you're going to get. That's unfortunate sometimes.
Hi, TK. Actually, I'm one of the person outside your company. I really like your first half part of the presentation. The reason is because you don't know all of us are still here, so you're super relaxed and you're talking something from the bottom of your heart, right? I like that part. Actually, yeah. Actually, I'm very happy you mentioned something. Maybe we hear something flying in the air. Sometimes they're talking about just that Uber encourage the competition,
Yeah.
which is a super good thing. I think most of the companies encourage competition, but sometimes the competition could cause some side effect, just like the collaboration may be weak, because
Mm.
everybody I want to be the number one, right? Because let's say I'm a let's say data science manager, so I see the team members sometimes have the similar issue. So how do you want to balance this one in just like because you mentioned this topic, that's why I asked this question.
Yeah.
How do you want to address this problem? Because sounds like you already get aware of something.
Well, here's the thing. It's there's a couple kinds of competition. There's competition with your competitors, like in the marketplace, and it can be super super healthy in order to not be lazy, to really focus on what the customer wants. I like to say I don't need to say that. I'm saying it. Okay. Uh, the the company that serves the customer best gets all the customers ultimately. And so the it can really help you focus and help you be customer obsessed. Then there's some chatter or other things about competition on the inside of a company, and that's something I don't generally encourage. Um, and it's certain things we have to fix at Uber in terms of how our performance systems work, reviews and things like that. We've got to do better on that to really get to the bottom of that, if that makes sense. There are certain cases where competition on the inside is okay, but it must be done really, really emotionally intelligently and very, very optimistically. Right? So, like, if you're doing self-driving, you might approach it two very different ways and tell the teams, hey, we don't know which way is going to work, but we got to try both because we don't know. And there can be a healthy competition across something like that, but you have to be very limited in when you do it and very careful in how you do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm another outsider.
Yeah. And what do you do?
I'm a software engineer. My question is the following. So after the last few weeks that Uber has been through, and of course after the big story broke out, there were a few more blog posts, anonymous or not, saying that there was more diversity. So what is your suggestion and recommendation for us women in tech? So if this happens in Uber, and everybody knows it's throughout the industry, right? What steps can we proactively take to make sure this doesn't happen, to defend our rights?
Yeah, well, let's start with what Uber did, and then we can go to beyond. So, blog post comes out. Don't know all the details. Just reading what you read, you have to assume it's true. And then you say, I am going to get to truth fearlessly and fiercely. And I'm going to do everything I can to fix the problem or address the problem. And then that's on that specific instance. And then you have to ask yourself, is there something bigger? Is there something bigger that's not just about one person, but about many? And then you say, what are and you get into it. You create a situation where everybody feels free to speak out. In our case, we said the former Attorney General of the United States is going to get to the truth on the specific and anything that could be bigger, right? And do it independently. And so that's taken it, like, that's at least seeking truth in a big way. But then after you find truth, you have to say, what are the bad behaviors in the single instance, systemically, that need to be dealt with? And in a lot of ways, what I talked about earlier gets to that, right? There's certain situations where if somebody's defensive, they can turn a session where somebody's telling somebody, hey, I'm giving you feedback, they can turn it into an aggressive response. And that is the best way to shut down feedback and creativity. It's the best way to create it's I shouldn't say best. It's just a terrible thing to do, and it makes a company worse. And especially if you are introverted, especially if you grew up a certain way and you're just not supposed to. It just bringing that negativity to the workplace is very bad, basically. And so there's some basics, but then there's other things like, is your performance review system set up so that people get competitive internally, as an example? If it is, that's a problem because then you can breed a whole new kind of negativity. Is your culture set up for people to be able to collaborate or not? If it's not, then what happens when there is negativity and people don't know that they're supposed to collaborate? So what you have to do is you have to find these systemic sort of mechanisms, these mechanisms that aren't encouraging the right behavior or aren't squishing out the bad behavior. And then you say, what are our values? So it goes to what I said earlier. So I don't know if I have the overall like the unlock. On my way here today, I was just thinking about things. And I'm trying to see if I can put my presentation aside and see if I can just de novo think about the problem. I truly believe that women should be really fierce about getting justice in the workplace and really making sure their leaders stand for justice and not just in words. That those principles that I put up there are things that, I mean, in some ways, find that centered place, be that fierce girl standing up to the bull.
I love that.
And create it, but make sure there's a place that's created that doesn't have bulls all over the frickin' place. Because if that's going on too much, you then cannot be yourself. And if you can't be yourself, you can't do your best work. And if you can't do your best work, then your company is losing out from the greatness of your mind, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've done a lot of self-reflection over the past few weeks, and you've mentioned on a lot about sort of systemic mechanisms in place that make it sort of combative, make it unhealthy.
Yeah.
But I guess the question now becomes, how did those systemic infractions or mechanisms happen in the first place? Or how is it the case that the values, which seem to come from a good place, suddenly morphed into something different?
There's a couple ways. First is if I heard information I didn't like or upset me, and I could be like very optimistic 95% of the time, but that 5%, if you get it wrong, especially at our scale, you get in a situation where that the wake of negativity behind it can have some bad repercussions. And so it starts at the top, which is you got to live your cultural values if you believe in them. And when you get it wrong, you need to apologize. And I've been pretty good. Hey, look, I think everybody's human. Nobody's perfect. I've been pretty good about apologizing pretty quickly when I get something wrong. But even in that moment, you're in a meeting and somebody gets too intense, that can really bring down the creativity and constructive dialogue that's necessary to get to the right answer. So that's part one. Part two is when you grow as fast as we did. And you're still building education systems about what those values are while growing. If you're not clear about what those values mean and how to do it and how not to do it, then people can misinterpret it. And I believe that 99% of the people at Uber are really, really well-meaning and well-intentioned, etc. But but they still need to understand what these values mean and how to put them into practice. You could see how toe stepping, if just taken as it is, could be a problem. I think one of the biggest problems on toe stepping is not the stepping on toes per se from the bottom up, because that's a wonderful thing, and most of the managers most of the time do fairly well receiving it. But sometimes it's the stepping on toes going down. And that's the thing that is one of the more destructive things. You need to be careful not to do that.
Hi, TK. My name is Deepthi. I'm an Eng manager actually in Komal's org.
I know.
And so my question is, when we use the term leader, people there are many definitions of it, and we use that word in many different contexts, right? So in your mind, do you see a difference between a leader and a manager? And if so, what is the difference in the roles of these two kind of words, leader and a manager?
Well, look, I think there is a difference. I think a leader is anybody, right? So you don't have to have people reporting into you, saluting to you or whatever to be a leader. And there's a thing called organic leadership, is that when you are enough of a leader, people will follow you even if they're not supposed to or instructed to, right? So it's hard to define what leadership is. Like, that's a tough one, but you sure know it when you see it.
It's leadership through influence versus through authority.
Well, there's a lot of ways to do it, for sure. But like the defined leader is like, whew, I don't know. Maybe it's about somebody who people want to follow. And then you go, okay, well, that's great. That was easy. What does that mean? And then we have a 20-hour discussion, So, so I think anybody can and ultimately should aspire to lead in some way. And then management is a whole other thing. Management is, well, do you want to be in charge of people in some fashion? And not in I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but I mean it in a sort of, let's call it more formal leadership. So I think to be a great manager, you have to be a good leader. Like, you can't be a great manager without being a leader of some kind. But you don't have to be a manager to be a leader. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry. Hi.
Hi.
My question is on a slightly different topic. I'm also not from Uber. So I'm just curious, like today we saw a lot of presentations related to autonomous cars, robots, machine learning, a lot of exciting stuff. But I'm just curious what the long-term vision is.
Yeah.
Because this is a very complex industry.
Yeah.
If there were comparisons to like flying airplane, I think there was an airplane. So aviation, it's all regulated.
Yeah.
There's security, possibly national security.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, how far are you thinking?
Look, the way we think about it is, even before you get to self-driving vehicles, there's just a huge amount of positive things that happen to cities when you do ride sharing. It starts with the fact that people who own cars use that car 4% of the day. And 96% of the day it's stored somewhere. A garage, on the street, something. 20% of the land of our cities is used to store these cars that are not on the roads, right? So if you can use these cars more efficiently, all of a sudden you give 20% of the land back to a city. That's like parks, that's schools, that's all the things that serve the people. But when you use them more efficiently and do things like Uber Pool, right now it's something like 45% of trips in San Francisco, for example, are Uber Pool trips. Now you're cleaning the air. And you're also reducing the number of cars on the road, and ultimately, where we aspire to go to is that there's no traffic at all in any major city. And we aspire to do that in like 5 years, which is crazy. And a lot of people look at me and tell me that all the time. But autonomy, self-driving vehicles, is on the journey, on the path towards that. And so it sort of supercharges the benefits of ride sharing, where nobody owns a vehicle, the land is given back to the people, the air is cleaner, and trillions of hours are given back to people because they're not sitting in traffic anymore. And then, of course, the other thing you get from self-driving, which is different than ride sharing, is these vehicles will be very, very safe. And so there are 1.3 million people who die a year needlessly because of human error in these cars. And if there are, and tens of millions of people are sort of seriously injured. And you think about what that means for society. Think about when you read the newspaper, if it's the New York Times, it's fine. What's on the front page? And what are those things we're worried about compared to 1.3 million senseless acts of violence? 1.3 million people dying every year. There's not a lot. And so there's just a lot to give back to society with this kind of technological progress. And so that's how we think about it.
Hi, I'm also not from Uber. My question was more about the fierce girl that you spoke about, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's awesome to see that we want the industry to have women who are like this fierce girl, right? But we
Yeah.
know many people out there who aren't.
Yeah.
And I know, I forget your name, I'm so sorry, but you were talking about these mentorship programs, or somebody was talking in the leadership forum about the mentorship programs that you guys have internally in Uber that you guys have started. I was wondering if you guys are looking at something externally to make these fierce girls out there.
Yeah. I love that.
I have to tell you one thing.
Go ahead.
My goal is right here. And we encourage people to come, show up here, even the girls.
All right.
Yeah.
And you should talk about the girls who code that we are doing.
Oh, for sure.
Well, and also one quick thing that I'm super excited about is our partnership with a company that Ariana Huffington launched recently called Thrive. So I know that like any and all opportunities we have to partner with the right external groups who we think can give us huge value in different areas, we do. And Ariana herself has just been such a tremendous role model for me through the years. I'm so happy that she's, on the board and partnering with us. So yes, the answer is we'll take all the help we can get as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, for sure. So, when I spoke about that, the statue of the girl, the very key thing I said that I think is important, we need to remember, is everybody in life will at some point see that allegory of the bull. And in that moment, we have to find the strength to stand up to it, if that makes sense. But we need to create environments where that is highly unlikely, because we do need to be ourselves, and we do want to do our best work. And if you're always standing up to a bull, unless that's your job, right? If you're a bullfighter, okay, that's like you do that every day. But if you're an emergency room surgeon, that's just every day. But there's lots of different kinds of people. And I was at first, when I was on my way up here, from the city, is I was looking up. I was like, bronze statue girl curious, bronze statue girl optimistic, bronze statue girl reading a book. You get the idea. Like, you can't just be in front of that bull all the time. And so we have to create environments where the curious little girl can thrive, and where where sweetness and care are encouraged and embraced, because it's part of what make communities beautiful places. And so that's the thing that I think we need to be careful of sometimes, is that we do want to celebrate that moment when you're confronted somehow and you must be fierce and you need to hold it. But we don't want to celebrate it in such a way that it's all the time. And we need to have systems that teach how to do it. Like if we're listening from the top down, then it's way easier to then step on a toe in a very optimistic way. So you get the idea. Yep.
Hi, Travis. I'm Carissa. I'm on the SRE team as an engineer.
Okay.
So I have a question. I guess you talked a lot about how you're changing the culture and the how things are at Uber. But one thing that I've kind of noticed, which is true, I think, before the blog, is that I think that how the culture is perceived on the outside doesn't really reflect what it's like on the inside. Because, I mean, in my personal opinion, yes, there are problems, but I think it's pretty freaking awesome. So, one of the things in SRE, when they first explained to me what the heck I was getting myself into, is they said that we're firefighters and that the most important job of a firefighter is not to put out fires, but to do all of the work to prevent them, so you don't spend your whole time putting out fires.
Yeah.
And when I look at how we deal with our image, it feels like that's what we're doing. Is all we're doing is putting out fires. And so we've talked a lot about internally, and when you don't think that the outside world is listening, all these awesome things and how fierce you are about this. But what are we doing besides the Uber ads, which are cool and inspiring, but not really making people too much more happy with us?
Yeah.
What are we doing to kind of move from just putting out fires reactively to actually actively changing the way people perceive the company?
Yeah. All right. So for the folks who are not from Uber, this is a question that we get a lot internally, because it is so very different. It's like this all the time, most of the time. And I don't know if I had all the answers, I would already, we would have figured this one out. But I'm working on the answers. And so the way I would put it is we have been very, like, I'm super myself when I'm like, this is just Uber peeps. And maybe the world isn't seeing that enough, right? And maybe we're not speaking out enough about the things we do care about. Maybe we're always a little bit too worried about it being NDA'd and that kind of thing. We need to get ourselves out there. And we need to figure out how to do it at scale, because we can be resilient to the outside, but if we are not telling our story, then that's obviously an issue. But I'd say before we even get to that, we still have to take it really seriously if there's a question mark about our actions. And we have to identify where the problems are and be better. We have to first make sure we're good on the inside. And I agree, look, I'm very optimistic about Uber internally too, but I still have to take it super seriously. The problem, like any sort of issue or problem, and again, start with this, like everything is true, and we're gonna go find that issue, and we're gonna solve it, and we're gonna make it better. So I look at it as an opportunity to make Uber better, to like really think deeply about culture. And maybe it's through discussions about our culture that we've never discussed openly ever, as part of it. But I can tell you that I spend a lot of time thinking about the question that you asked, and sort of saying we always lean on action first. How can we support it with storytelling? but it's a little bit of both. And I think a certain amount of pragmatism is also helpful, and I talked about that at our Tuesday staff meeting. So I talk more. I'll be talking more about that on the Tuesdays to follow, and maybe more publicly as well.
All right.